So, what if I told you that by measuring its economy more accurately, a country found out it was actually slightly smaller, but growing faster than anyone thought? It sounds a little paradoxical, right? Well, that's exactly what's just happened in India. So, how did this happen? And more importantly, what does it mean for one of the world's fastest growing economies? Let's break it all down. All right, here's what we're going to cover. First up, a quick refresher on what GDP is all about. Then, we'll dive into India's new and improved measuring stick for its economy. After that comes the big reveal, this strange result of a smaller economy but stronger growth. And finally, we'll talk about why getting these numbers right is just so incredibly important. So let's kick things off with the absolute basics. You hear the term GDP thrown around all the time on the news, but what does it really mean? You can think of it as the economy's annual health report card. At its heart, this is the textbook definition. GDP is the grand total, the final price tag, on everything produced for sale inside a country over a certain amount of time, usually a quarter or a full year. It's pretty much the standard way we measure the size and health of an economy anywhere in the world. But, it is so much more than just a number for economists to argue about. These figures have a massive impact on the real world. They guide government policies that affect literally everyone, from farmers to tech startups. They shape where big money gets invested, and they can even influence the interest rates you pay on your loans. Okay, now let's get to the real meat of the story. India has made a fundamental change in how it measures its own GDP. So let's dig into why the rules of the game have been updated. The single biggest change is this right here. The base year, which is kind of like the starting line for all the calculations, has been moved way forward, more than a decade, from 2011-12 all the way to 2022-23. This is a huge statistical overhaul. So why bother doing all this? Well, there are three really good reasons. First, it helps capture all the massive changes in the economy, like the explosion of the digital sector that just didn't exist in the same way a decade ago. Second, it brings India's methods in line with global best practices. And third, and this is a big one, it lets statisticians use much better, more up-to-the-minute data from things like the GST tax network. And of course, that leads to a pretty critical question. When you switch to a more precise, more modern tool, what happens to the measurement you thought you knew? Well, the answer isn't always straightforward. In fact, as experts like the former chief economic advisor Arvind Subramanian have warned in the past, changing the formula can give you really complex results that you have to interpret carefully. His caution just goes to show how vital it is to understand the details of what actually changed under the hood. This gives us a fantastic before and after look. The old method, well, it had to rely on a lot of proxy indicators, which are basically educated guesses, and surveys that were done pretty infrequently. But now, the new system is plugged into real-time digital data from sources like the National Tax Network, public finance systems, even vehicle registrations. Plus, they're using regular annual surveys, which gives them a much sharper, more current picture of what's going on. Let's just zoom in on these upgrades for a sec. 1, getting data every year on the informal sector, that gives you a constant pulse on a huge part of the economy. 2, using double deflation. It's a much more sophisticated way to adjust for inflation. Think of it as using a scalpel instead of a butter knife. It's way more precise. 3, that digital data integration means the numbers are way less of a look in the rearview mirror. And 4, all of this just helps clean up the data and reduce statistical noise. It's a major leap forward in accuracy. So all these technical changes bring us to the most fascinating part of this whole story. They've produced a really surprising, kind of counterintuitive result. Let's get to the big reveal. Okay, let's start with the old picture. Based on the previous way of doing things, the forecast for India's economy in the 2026 fiscal year was this number, 357 lakh crore rupees. Got it? Keep that figure in your head. Because under the new, more accurate system, the size for that very same year is now estimated at 345 lakh crore rupees. So it's a downward revision. The economy, in absolute size, is measured as being a little smaller. But, and this is the huge twist, while the overall size is a bit smaller, the rate of growth has been revised pretty significantly upwards. The estimate for that same fiscal year has jumped from 7.1% all the way up to a much stronger 7.6%. So yeah, here it is, the core paradox. A slightly smaller pie, but one that's expanding at a much faster clip. It seems the new data found that while some parts of the economy might not be as big as once thought, Their dynamism, their growth, was actually being underestimated. That is the key takeaway. So, what's actually powering this faster growth? Well, this chart tells a really clear story. The new data shows that private consumption, that's you or me, out there spending money, is now the main engine, growing at a blistering 7.7%. That's ahead of both investment and government spending. And honestly, that's a really positive sign. When private consumption is leading the way, it's usually seen as a signal of broad-based health and confidence across the entire economy, not just growth that's being propped up by big government projects. Okay, so for a final section, let's just step back and ask the big question. Why go through all this statistical trouble? Why does this level of accuracy actually matter in the real world? Well, it matters a whole lot. Because when the government has a clearer picture, they can make smarter decisions. When global investors trust your numbers, they're way more likely to bring their money in. It boosts India's credibility on the world stage and makes planning the national budget way more reliable. At the end of the day, it's about having a true mirror to see what your economy really looks like. And this also recalibrates some of those big national goals. You know, that well-known ambition of becoming a $5 trillion economy? Based on this new data, the timeline for that gets a little adjustment. It now looks like that milestone will be reached around the 2028-29 fiscal year. But really, the key takeaway here isn't about the slight delay. It's about the fact that the entire journey toward that massive goal is now built on numbers that are way more solid, more reliable, and more believable to the rest of the world. The foundation is stronger, even if the road is just a little bit longer. And that really leaves us with a final big picture thought. Now that India has this much clearer, more accurate mirror reflecting its economic reality, the real question is, how will it use this sharper image to navigate all the challenges and opportunities that lie on the path to its future?